The helicopter's rotors cut through the Afghan night air like thunder, carrying 12 Navy SEALs toward what intelligence called a routine extraction mission. Staff Sergeant Marcus Rivera checked his weapon for the third time, his eyes scanning the faces of his team. They were good men, battle-tested and reliable. But tonight felt different. Tonight they had a new medic. Dr. Sarah Chen sat quietly in the corner of the aircraft, her medical bag secured tightly against her chest. At 28, she looked too young and too small to be flying into a combat zone with America's elite warriors. Her dark hair was pulled back in a regulation bun, and her uniform was crisp and new. The SEALs had been told she was fresh from medical school, assigned to their unit through some bureaucratic shuffle they didn't understand. "Doc, you ever been in a hot zone before?" shouted Petty Officer Jake Williams over the engine noise. His voice carried the skepticism that had been brewing among the team since they learned about their new addition. Sarah looked up, her brown eyes steady and calm. "No, this is my first deployment," she replied simply, her voice barely audible over the helicopter's roar. The men exchanged glances. Williams shook his head slightly and Rivera felt his jaw tighten. They were heading into Taliban territory to extract a wounded CIA operative, and they were doing it with a medic who had never heard a shot fired in anger. It felt like a recipe for disaster. The mission commander, Lieutenant Commander Tom Harrison, leaned forward from his position near the cockpit. "Listen up," he called out. "Intelligence says the package is wounded but mobile. We're looking at light resistance, maybe 3 or 4 hostiles. We get in, grab our guy, and get out. 15 minutes on the ground maximum." The pilot's voice crackled through their headsets. 2 minutes to LZ. Weather's clear, no activity on thermal. Rivera felt the familiar pre-mission tension settle over the team. These men had been through dozens of operations together. They moved like a single organism, each knowing exactly what the others would do before they did it. But now they had an unknown variable, a civilian doctor who might freeze up when the bullets started flying. As the helicopter began its descent, Sarah closed her eyes and took a deep breath. The other men assumed she was praying or fighting back fear. They had no way of knowing that she was running through combat medical procedures in her mind. Procedures she had learned not in a classroom but in places where American forces weren't supposed to be operating. The aircraft touched down with a jarring thud, and immediately the team was in motion. Rivera led the way, his rifle up and scanning for threats. Williams and 3 others formed a perimeter while Harrison's group moved toward the coordinates where the CIA operative was supposed to be waiting. Sarah followed close behind the main group, her medical bag bouncing against her hip as she ran. The landscape was harsh and unforgiving, all rocks and scrub brush under a moon that provided just enough light to navigate by. She could hear the men's breathing through their comm system. Steady and controlled despite the pace they were maintaining, they found the CIA operative, codenamed Phoenix, huddled behind a fallen tree about 200 meters from the landing zone. He was conscious but had taken shrapnel to his left leg and shoulder. Blood had soaked through his makeshift bandages and his face was pale with shock. "Doc, you're up," Harrison called out. Sarah dropped to her knees beside the wounded man without hesitation. Her hands moved quickly and efficiently, checking his pulse and examining his wounds. "The bleeding's mostly stopped," she reported quietly. "But he's lost a lot of blood. We need to get him to a hospital soon." As she worked, applying fresh bandages and starting an IV line, the wounded operative looked up at her with confusion. "Do I know you?" he whispered. Before Sarah could respond, the night exploded with gunfire. Muzzle flashes lit up the darkness from 3 different directions as Taliban fighters opened up with AK-47s and a heavy machine gun. The SEALs immediately returned fire, their training taking over as they moved to cover, and began engaging the enemy. "We've got company," Williams shouted into his radio. "Multiple hostiles, at least 6 or 7. Rivera cursed under his breath. The intelligence had been wrong again. This wasn't light resistance. It was a well-planned ambush. The Taliban had known they were coming. In the chaos of the firefight, Sarah continued working on Phoenix, seemingly oblivious to the bullets snapping through the air around them. Her hands never shook as she secured his IV and prepared him for transport. The wounded CIA operative watched her with growing amazement. "We need to move," Harrison yelled. "Williams, take point back to the LZ. Rivera, cover our 6. The team began their fighting withdrawal, carrying Phoenix between them while maintaining suppressing fire against their attackers. Sarah stayed close to her patient, one hand keeping pressure on his shoulder wound while the other held his IV bag. Halfway back to the helicopter, disaster struck. A rocket-propelled grenade exploded against a boulder just 10 feet from their position, sending shrapnel flying in all directions. 3 of the SEALs went down, including Rivera, who took a piece of metal in his thigh. "Man down! Man down!" someone screamed into the radio. Sarah looked around at the chaos and made a decision that would change everything. She handed Phoenix's IV bag to Harrison and moved toward the wounded SEALs with a speed and purpose that surprised everyone. "Doc, stay with Phoenix," Harrison ordered. But Sarah was already kneeling beside Rivera, her hands working to stop the bleeding from his leg wound. "He's stable for now," she called back, referring to Phoenix. "These men need immediate attention." As she worked on Rivera applying a tourniquet with practiced efficiency, more gunfire erupted from their right flank. The Taliban fighters were trying to cut off their route to the helicopter. "We're surrounded," Williams reported grimly. It was then that Sarah Chen made the decision that would reveal everything the SEALs didn't know about their new medic. She looked up from treating Rivera's wound, her eyes scanning the tactical situation with the gaze of someone who had been in similar circumstances before. "I can get us out of this," she said quietly, but with absolute confidence. Harrison stared at the young medic in disbelief. Around them, gunfire continued to crack through the night air, and his men were pinned down by an enemy force that seemed to know exactly where they would be. The mission was falling apart, and now their rookie medic was claiming she could save them all. "Doc, with all due respect, this isn't a medical emergency," Harrison said tersely, his rifle trained on a muzzle flash in the distance. "This is a tactical situation." Sarah finished applying the tourniquet to Rivera's leg and helped him to a sitting position against a rock. The sergeant's face was tight with pain, but the bleeding had stopped. She looked at Harrison with those same calm eyes that had unsettled the team during the helicopter ride. "Sir, I know exactly what kind of situation this is," she said quietly. "The enemy has positioned a machine gun nest on that ridge to our north. There's a sniper in the rocks to our east, probably with night vision, and they've got at least 4 riflemen moving to flank us from the south." Harrison's eyes widened. Sarah's assessment matched exactly what his own tactical analysis had determined, but she had figured it out in less than 30 seconds while treating wounded men under fire. That wasn't something they taught in medical school. "How do you—" he started to ask, but Sarah was already moving. She pulled a compact radio from her medical bag, not the standard issue comm gear they all carried, but something more sophisticated. "Viper 6, this is Guardian Angel," she spoke into the device in a voice that had completely changed. Gone was the quiet, nervous tone of the rookie medic. This was the voice of someone giving orders in a combat zone. "Guardian Angel, Viper 6, we show you in trouble down there. What do you need?" came the immediate response. "I need close air support on these coordinates." Sarah rattled off a string of numbers with military precision. "Enemy machine gun emplacement on the north ridge, danger, close authorization given." Harrison grabbed her arm. "Who the hell are you?" he demanded. Before Sarah could answer, Williams' voice came over their team radio. "Contact right. They're moving to flank us." The Taliban fighters were indeed trying to circle around their position, using the cover of darkness and the rocky terrain to get behind the American forces. Phoenix, the wounded CIA operative, was barely conscious now, his blood loss taking its toll despite Sarah's medical intervention. "We need to move," Rivera said through gritted teeth, struggling to stand on his wounded leg. "They're going to overrun us." That's when the night sky lit up with tracer fire from above. An AC-130 gunship, invisible in the darkness until it opened fire, began methodically destroying the Taliban positions that Sarah had identified. The heavy machine gun nest on the ridge disappeared in a ball of flame and smoke. "How did you call in air support?" Harrison asked Sarah, his voice filled with confusion and growing suspicion. "Medical personnel don't have authorization for close air support." Sarah was already back to treating the wounded, checking on the other 2 SEALs who had been hit by the RPG blast. One had a concussion and multiple lacerations, while the other had taken shrapnel in his arm. She worked with the efficiency of someone who had treated combat wounds many times before. "Because I'm not just medical personnel," she said, without looking up from her work. "My name is Dr. Sarah Chen, but my call sign is Guardian Angel. I've been operating in classified theaters for the past 3 years." The gunship continued its devastating attack on the Taliban positions, giving the SEAL team the breathing room they desperately needed. Williams and his men began advancing, clearing the route back to the helicopter while the enemy was suppressed by the air support. "That's impossible," Harrison said, though his tone suggested he was beginning to believe otherwise. "We were told you're fresh from medical school." Sarah finished bandaging the SEAL with the arm wound and helped him to his feet. "I am fresh from medical school. Johns Hopkins graduated top of my class 6 months ago, but medical school wasn't my first career." Phoenix, the CIA operative, was trying to sit up despite his wounds. His eyes were focused on Sarah now, and there was recognition in his gaze. "I knew I'd seen you before," he whispered. "Syria, the operation in Aleppo 2 years ago. You were the medic who extracted the ambassador's daughter," Phoenix continued, his voice growing stronger despite his injuries. "They said you killed 6 enemy fighters while treating wounded civilians." The SEALs stared at Sarah in stunned silence. The quiet, nervous young woman they had dismissed as a liability was apparently a veteran operator with a classified background. Nothing about their mission briefing had prepared them for this revelation. "We need to move," Sarah said, taking charge of the situation with natural authority. "That air support bought us time, but there will be more Taliban fighters heading this way. The whole valley probably heard that firefight." She looked at Harrison with eyes that now seemed much older than her 28 years. "Sir, with your permission, I'd like to suggest a tactical modification to our extraction plan." Harrison found himself nodding before he realized what he was doing. "What do you have in mind, Doc?" "The original LZ is compromised. They knew we were coming, which means they probably have people watching our helicopter. I recommend we move to the alternate extraction point, 2 clicks east of here. It's rougher terrain, but we can use that to our advantage." Rivera, despite his wounded leg, was listening intently. "How do you know about the alternate LZ? That wasn't in the general briefing." Sarah helped Phoenix to his feet, supporting his weight with surprising strength for her small frame. "Because I helped plan this mission, Sergeant. The medical officer briefing you received wasn't the whole story." Williams jogged back to their position, his rifle still at the ready. "Route's clear, but we need to move fast. I can see vehicle lights in the distance, probably reinforcements." The revelation that their medic had been involved in planning their mission sent another shock through the team. Everything they thought they knew about Dr. Sarah Chen was turning out to be wrong. She wasn't the liability they had feared. She might be the most qualified person on the entire team. "Who do you really work for?" Harrison asked as they began moving toward the new extraction point. Sarah adjusted Phoenix's weight across her shoulders and checked her watch. "Officially, I'm a Navy medical officer assigned to SEAL Team 6 for combat experience before my residency. Unofficially, I work for people who don't officially exist, treating people who are never officially where I treat them." The team moved through the rocky terrain with renewed purpose, Sarah somehow managing to keep pace despite carrying much of Phoenix's weight. The CIA operative was drifting in and out of consciousness, but his vital signs remained stable thanks to her medical intervention. Behind them, the AC-130 continued to prowl the night sky, ensuring that any Taliban pursuit would be quickly neutralized. But Sarah knew that air support wouldn't be available much longer. They needed to reach the extraction point soon, or they would find themselves stranded in hostile territory with wounded men and limited ammunition. The alternate extraction point was a nightmare of loose rocks and steep terrain, exactly the kind of place helicopter pilots hated to land in the dark. As the team approached the coordinates Sarah had provided, Harrison couldn't shake the feeling that he was following orders from someone whose authority he didn't understand. "Guardian Angel, this is Viper 6. Sarah spoke into her specialized radio again. "Request immediate extraction at secondary LZ. We have multiple wounded and are expecting enemy contact." "Copy, Guardian Angel. Extracting bird is 2 minutes out. Be advised, Taliban vehicles moving toward your previous position." Rivera, hobbling on his wounded leg with Williams supporting him, looked back toward the original landing zone. In the distance, they could see headlights moving across the valley floor. "Looks like you were right about that ambush." "Doc," Sarah was monitoring Phoenix's condition as they moved, checking his pulse and the flow of his IV. The CIA operative had lost a dangerous amount of blood, and even with her medical intervention, he needed surgery soon. The shrapnel in his shoulder had done more damage than was immediately apparent. "How long before he goes into shock?" Harrison asked, noticing Sarah's concerned expression as she examined Phoenix. "We've got maybe 20 minutes before his condition becomes critical," she replied honestly. The IV is keeping his blood pressure stable, but barely. If we don't get him to a surgical facility soon, she didn't need to finish the sentence. Everyone understood the implications. The sound of rotor blades began to echo off the rocky walls around them, and soon a Black Hawk helicopter appeared over the ridge, its crew scanning the area for threats. The pilot's voice came through their radios. "This is Dustoff 27. I show you on the deck, but this LZ is not ideal. I can give you 30 seconds before I have to pull out." "Understood," Harrison replied. "We're coming to you now." The team broke cover and moved toward the helicopter, which was hovering just a few feet above the uneven ground. The pilot was fighting the controls, trying to keep the aircraft steady in the swirling wind patterns created by the rocky terrain. As they approached the aircraft, Sarah's radio crackled with an urgent transmission. "Guardian Angel Viper 6, we have a problem. Satellite imagery shows a large convoy of vehicles moving toward your position from the east. Estimate 20 to 30 fighters, heavily armed." Sarah cursed under her breath, something that surprised the SEALs who had only heard her speak in calm, measured tones until now. "Sir," she called to Harrison, "we need to abort this extraction." "What?" Harrison couldn't believe what he was hearing. They were 10 feet from safety and their medic was telling them to leave. "That convoy isn't random," Sarah explained quickly, helping Phoenix toward the helicopter door. "They're moving too fast and in too organized a formation. Someone is coordinating their response, probably with radio intelligence. If we take off now, they'll track our flight path and intercept us before we reach friendly airspace." The helicopter crew chief was waving them forward urgently, but Sarah held her ground. She pulled out a different device from her medical bag, something that looked like a military GPS unit but with additional electronics attached. "I'm uploading new coordinates to your flight system," she told the pilot over the radio. "Take off immediately and fly to these coordinates. Stay low and use the valley system to mask your approach." "What about you?" the pilot asked. "We'll make our own way out," Sarah replied with calm confidence. Harrison grabbed her arm again, harder this time. "Doc, I don't know what kind of authorization you think you have, but I'm not leaving my men in a combat zone based on the word of a medic." Sarah looked at him with eyes that had seen things no medical school could prepare someone for. "Lieutenant Commander, call your base command. Ask them about Operation Sandstorm and clearance level Guardian Angel. Do it now." Something in her voice made Harrison reach for his radio. The conversation that followed was brief and conducted in code words that most of the team didn't understand. When Harrison finished talking, his face had gone pale. "Holy shit," he whispered.
"Who are you really?"
Before Sarah could answer, Williams called out from his position watching their back trail. "We've got vehicles closing fast. Maybe 5 minutes before they're on top of us." Sarah was already moving, helping Phoenix away from the now departed helicopter and toward a defensive position in the rocks. "I'm exactly who I said I am. Dr. Sarah Chen, Navy Medical Officer. But I'm also Guardian Angel, which means I have authorization to make tactical decisions that supersede normal command structure in certain circumstances." The team established a defensive perimeter in the rocks, with the wounded Phoenix positioned in the center where Sarah could continue to monitor his condition. Rivera's leg wound was causing him significant pain, but he was still combat effective. The other 2 wounded SEALs were patched up enough to fight if necessary. "So what's the plan, Guardian Angel?" Harrison asked, using her operational call sign for the first time. Sarah pulled out a detailed map of the area, one that was far more comprehensive than the standard issue maps the SEALs carried. It showed things like underground water sources, hidden caves, and what appeared to be old smuggling routes. "There's a cave system about half a kilometer north of here," she said, pointing to a location on the map. "It connects to a valley on the other side of this ridge. If we can reach it before that convoy gets here, we can move through the mountains and reach a pickup point that's not on any Taliban maps." Williams was monitoring the enemy approach through his night vision scope. "Those vehicles are definitely military," he reported. "Looks like they've got heavy weapons mounted. We do not want to get into a firefight with that much firepower." "Then we don't fight them," Sarah said simply. "We disappear." She began pulling additional equipment from her medical bag, items that definitely weren't standard medical supplies. Smoke grenades, explosive charges, and what looked like specialized climbing gear. "Doc, just how much gear do you have in that bag?" Rivera asked with amazement. "Enough," Sarah replied, checking Phoenix's pulse again. His condition was deteriorating, but slowly. They still had time to move him if they were careful. The sound of vehicle engines was getting louder now, echoing off the canyon walls as the Taliban convoy approached their position. Sarah estimated they had maybe 3 minutes before the enemy would be close enough to spot them. "Time to go," she announced, helping Phoenix to his feet. "Stay low, move fast, and follow my lead. The cave entrance is camouflaged, so you won't see it until we're right on top of it." As the team began to move, Harrison found himself wondering just how many missions like this Sarah had been on before. Her confidence and tactical knowledge suggested extensive field experience, but her official records indicated she was fresh from medical training. The pieces of the puzzle were starting to come together, but the picture they formed was unlike anything Harrison had encountered in his 15 years of military service. Dr. Sarah Chen wasn't just a medic who had been assigned to their unit. She was something else entirely. Something that operated in the shadows between official military operations and classified intelligence work. And right now, she was their best hope of getting out of Afghanistan alive. The cave entrance was exactly where Sarah had indicated, hidden behind a cluster of boulders that looked completely natural to the untrained eye. But as the team approached, Harrison could see the subtle signs that this was more than just a geological formation. The rocks had been carefully arranged to conceal what appeared to be an ancient smuggling route. "How did you know about this place?" Williams whispered as they helped Phoenix through the narrow opening. Sarah activated a small LED light and began leading them deeper into the tunnel system. "I've been mapping these routes for 2 years. This whole region is honeycomb with passages that local smugglers have used for centuries. Most of them predate the Taliban by hundreds of years. The tunnel was larger than it appeared from the outside, wide enough for the team to move in single file while supporting their wounded. The walls showed tool marks from generations of people who had expanded the natural cave system for their own purposes. Behind them, they could hear the rumble of vehicles arriving at the extraction point they had just abandoned. Voices in Pashto echoed across the rocks as the Taliban fighters searched for any sign of the American forces they knew had been there. Phoenix was struggling to stay conscious, his blood loss finally starting to take a serious toll despite Sarah's medical intervention. She checked his pulse again and frowned. His heart rate was becoming irregular, a sign that his body was beginning to shut down from shock. "We need to stop," she announced quietly. "I have to do more work on him or we're going to lose him." Harrison looked around the tunnel. They were maybe 200 meters from the entrance, but the voices outside were getting louder. The Taliban fighters were expanding their search pattern. "How long do you need?" 10 minutes, maybe 15, Sarah replied, already pulling supplies from her seemingly bottomless medical bag. "But I need him lying flat and I need good light." Rivera, despite his own wound, was keeping watch back toward the tunnel entrance. "I don't think we have 15 minutes. Doc, they're getting closer." Sarah's hands were already working on Phoenix, starting a second IV line and administering medications that the SEALs didn't recognize. "Then you'll have to buy me the time I need." It was then that the team heard something that made their blood run cold. The sound of someone speaking English with a British accent coming from the tunnel entrance behind them. "I know you're in there, Guardian Angel," the voice called out, echoing off the stone walls. "My name is Colonel Marcus Webb, British SAS. I think we need to have a conversation." Sarah's hands never stopped working on Phoenix, but Harrison could see her jaw tighten. "That's not good," she muttered. "You know this guy?" Williams asked, his rifle trained on the tunnel opening. "By reputation," Sarah replied grimly. "Colonel Webb works for people who don't officially exist, hunting people like me." The British voice continued from outside the cave. "I'm going to come in slowly with my hands visible. I'm not here to fight. I'm here to collect something that belongs to my employers." Harrison made a tactical decision. "Williams, Rivera, watch our 6. If there's another way out of this tunnel system, we might need it." He looked at Sarah. "What does he want?" Sarah was injecting something directly into Phoenix's IV line, something that immediately improved his color and breathing. "He wants me," she said simply. "Or more specifically, he wants the information I've been collecting for the past 3 years." The sound of footsteps echoed from the tunnel entrance, slow and deliberate. A light appeared in the darkness, and soon they could see a tall figure in British military fatigues approaching with his hands raised. Colonel Webb was older than Sarah, maybe 45, with the kind of weathered face that spoke of decades in special operations. His uniform bore no identifying marks, but his equipment was top quality and his bearing was unmistakably military. "Dr. Chen," he said politely when he was close enough to see her clearly. Or should I say, guardian angel? You've led us quite a chase across 3 continents. Sarah continued working on Phoenix while talking. Colonel Webb, I heard you were working private sector now. How are the Meridian Group treating you? Webb's smile was cold. Well enough. They're very interested in your research into classified medical techniques, particularly your work with combat stress mitigation and enhanced performance protocols. Harrison was beginning to understand that this conversation was about much more than a simple medical assignment. The pieces were starting to fall into place, revealing a picture that was far more complex than anything he had been briefed on. You've been experimenting on soldiers, Webb continued, developing ways to help them fight longer, harder, and with less psychological trauma. That research is worth a considerable amount of money to the right buyers. Sarah finally looked up from Phoenix, her face hard with anger. I've been trying to help people survive combat with their minds intact. There's a difference, perhaps, Webb said, but the applications are the same. My employers are prepared to offer you a very generous salary to continue your work under their auspices. Williams had found what appeared to be another tunnel leading deeper into the mountain. He signaled to Harrison that they might have an escape route, but it would mean leaving cover and moving through unknown terrain. And if I refuse? Sarah asked, though her tone suggested she already knew the answer. Webb's expression hardened. Then I'm afraid this conversation becomes considerably less pleasant. You see, Dr. Chen, you've seen too much and know too many secrets to simply walk away. My employers prefer to have assets like you working for them rather than against them. Sarah made a decision that surprised everyone. She stood up slowly, leaving Phoenix in Harrison's care, and walked toward Webb with her hands empty and visible. Colonel, you're absolutely right about one thing, she said calmly. I do know too many secrets. She was now close enough to Webb that the two of them were almost touching in the narrow tunnel. The British operative relaxed slightly, thinking she was about to surrender. That's when Sarah moved with the lightning speed of someone trained in close quarters combat. Her hand struck Webb's throat while her foot swept his legs, sending him crashing to the tunnel floor. Before he could react, she had his sidearm and was pointing it at his head. But what you don't know, she continued in the same calm voice, is that some of those secrets include advanced hand-to-hand combat training from people who make the SAS look like Boy Scouts. Webb lay on the tunnel floor, gasping for breath and staring up at Sarah with new respect and considerable concern. You're making a mistake, Dr. Chen. I didn't come alone. As if summoned by his words, automatic weapons fire erupted from the tunnel entrance. The Taliban fighters who had been searching for them had apparently encountered Webb's backup team, and now both groups were shooting at each other while the Americans were trapped in the middle. The gunfire outside the cave was intense and chaotic, indicating that neither the Taliban fighters nor Webb's mercenary team had expected to encounter each other. Sarah used the confusion to her advantage, keeping Webb's weapon trained on him while motioning for the SEALs to move deeper into the tunnel system. How many men did you bring? She asked Webb quietly. The British colonel was still catching his breath from her strike to his throat. 4, he wheezed. Professional contractors. They're not going to last long against that many Taliban fighters. Harrison was monitoring Phoenix's condition while keeping one eye on the confrontation between Sarah and Webb. The CIA operative was stable for now, but he still needed surgery within the next few hours or his condition would become critical again. Williams, what does that tunnel look like? Harrison called out quietly. It goes back about 50 meters, then branches off in 2 directions, Williams reported. One heads north toward the next valley, the other goes deeper into the mountain. Can't tell where either one leads. The sound of gunfire was getting closer, suggesting that the fight outside was moving toward the cave entrance. Sarah made a quick tactical decision. We're taking the northern tunnel, she announced. Colonel Webb is coming with us as insurance. Like hell I am, Webb protested, trying to get to his feet. Sarah pressed the muzzle of his own pistol against his forehead. Colonel, you have 2 choices. You can come with us and maybe live through this, or you can stay here and definitely die when whoever wins that firefight comes looking for us. Webb looked toward the tunnel entrance, where muzzle flashes were now visible in the darkness. The gunfire was sporadic but intense, indicating that both sides were taking casualties. Fine, he said reluctantly. But my people will find us. Your people are probably dead, Sarah replied matter-of-factly. Taliban fighters know this terrain better than anyone. and they outnumber your contractors 3-1. The team began moving deeper into the tunnel system, with Rivera and one of the other wounded SEALs supporting Phoenix while Williams took point. Sarah kept Webb moving ahead of her, the pistol never wavering from his back. As they moved through the underground passages, Harrison found himself studying Sarah with new eyes. Everything about her demeanor had changed since the confrontation with Webb began. The quiet, nervous medic was completely gone, replaced by someone who moved and spoke with the confidence of a veteran operator. "So what's your real story, Doc?" he asked quietly as they navigated a particularly narrow section of tunnel. Sarah glanced back at him, her face partially illuminated by the LED lights they were using to navigate. "The real story is that 3 years ago I was recruited out of medical school by a joint CIA-DoD program that doesn't officially exist. They needed someone who could operate as both a combat medic and an intelligence asset." "What kind of intelligence?" Rivera asked, wincing as his wounded leg hit an uneven section of floor. "Medical intelligence," Sarah replied, "specifically studying how different armies treat their wounded, what kind of medical supplies they use, and what that tells us about their capabilities and intentions." Webb spoke up from ahead of them. "What she's not telling you is that her research went far beyond simple intelligence gathering. She was developing ways to enhance soldier performance using experimental drugs and procedures." Sarah's expression hardened. "I was trying to help people survive impossible situations. There's a difference between enhancement and survival medicine." The tunnel began to slope upward, indicating they were approaching another exit. Williams had moved ahead to scout their route and was now signaling for them to halt. "What is it?" Harrison whispered into his radio. "I can see daylight ahead, but there's a problem," Williams replied quietly. "This exit opens onto a cliff face about 30 feet above the valley floor. And there are vehicles down there." Sarah moved forward to assess their situation, keeping Webb ahead of her. The tunnel exit was indeed high above the valley, but it was accessible if they had climbing equipment. Unfortunately, the vehicles Williams had spotted were definitely hostile. "Taliban?" Harrison asked. "No," Sarah said, studying the vehicles through a small pair of binoculars she had produced from her medical bag. "Those are Western vehicles. Military contractors, probably more of Webb's people." Webb smiled grimly. "I told you my employers were serious about this, Dr. Chen. You can't run forever." Sarah was quiet for a moment, thinking through their options. Phoenix was stable but still needed medical attention. They had limited ammunition and they were trapped between hostile forces on both sides. But as she studied the terrain below, an idea began to form. "Williams, how much rope do we have?" she asked. "Maybe 40 meters of fast rope in our gear," he replied. "Why?" Sarah pointed to a specific spot in the valley below. "See that dried riverbed? It leads to a series of ravines that connect to the main highway about 2 kilometers from here. If we can reach it, we can disappear into the local population." "That's a hell of a descent," Rivera observed, looking down at the cliff face. "And those contractors will see us the moment we start rappelling." Sarah's smile was cold and determined. "Not if they're dealing with other problems." She pulled another device from her medical bag, something that looked like a military radio, but with additional antennas and electronics. "Guardian Angel to all stations, this is a priority flash message. Request immediate close air support at these coordinates. Authorization Guardian Angel 77 Delta." The response came within seconds. "Guardian Angel, this is Spectre 2-1. We show hostile vehicles at your location. Are you requesting engagement?" "Confirmed, Spectre 2-1. Multiple hostile vehicles with armed personnel. Danger close authorization given." Webb's eyes widened as he realized what Sarah was doing. "You're calling in an airstrike on civilian contractors?" "I'm calling in an airstrike on armed mercenaries operating illegally in a combat zone," Sarah corrected. "There's a difference." The sound of jet engines began to echo through the valley as an F-16 fighter approached their position. Within moments, the vehicles below erupted in flames as precision-guided munitions found their targets. In the chaos and smoke that followed, Sarah led the team down the cliff face using their rappelling equipment. Phoenix was carefully lowered in an improvised stretcher, while Webb was forced to descend with his hands secured behind his back. As they reached the valley floor and began moving toward the dried riverbed, Harrison found himself wondering just how deep Sarah's connections really went. She had called in military air support with a simple radio call, suggesting she had access to resources far beyond what any normal medical officer would possess. How many people know who you really are? He asked as they took cover in a drainage ditch while more aircraft circled overhead. Sarah checked Phoenix's vital signs again, satisfied that he was still stable despite the rough descent. Very few, she replied quietly. And after today, probably fewer still. The implication was clear. Their mission had uncovered something that powerful people wanted to keep hidden, and Sarah's exposure would have consequences for everyone involved. The dried riverbed provided excellent concealment as the team moved toward the main highway. Above them, coalition aircraft continued to patrol the area, ensuring that any remaining hostile forces would think twice before pursuing them. But Sarah knew their safety was temporary at best. Phoenix had lost consciousness again during the repelling operation, and his pulse was becoming increasingly irregular despite her continued medical intervention. They needed to reach a proper medical facility soon or all her efforts would be wasted. There's a village about 1 kilometer ahead, she told Harrison as they paused to rest in a cluster of rocks. It has a small clinic and radio communications. We can call for extraction from there. Webb, who had been forced to march with them while his hands remained secured, spoke up from where he sat against a boulder. Dr. Chen, you're making this far more complicated than it needs to be. My employers simply want to hire you. The pay is quite generous. Your employers want to weaponize medical research, Sarah replied without looking at him. They want to turn healing into a tool for making better killers. Rivera, who had been quiet for most of their escape, finally asked the question that had been bothering all of them. Doc, what exactly were you researching? What's so important that people are willing to start a war over it? Sarah was quiet for a long moment, checking Phoenix's IV lines and monitoring his breathing. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. I discovered something that could change warfare forever, she said. A way to help soldiers operate effectively in combat, while maintaining their psychological stability. No more post-traumatic stress, no more combat fatigue, no more soldiers breaking down under pressure. William stared at her in amazement. That's impossible. Combat stress is part of being human. Not necessarily, Sarah replied. The human brain can be trained to compartmentalize trauma in real time, to process violent experiences without forming the kind of emotional associations that lead to PTSD, but it requires very specific medical interventions and psychological conditioning. Harrison was beginning to understand the implications of what she was describing. You're talking about creating super soldiers, people who could fight indefinitely without psychological consequences. I'm talking about helping people survive impossible situations with their minds intact, Sarah corrected firmly. But yes, the military applications are obvious, and that's why various governments and private military companies are very interested in my research. The sound of vehicles on the highway ahead interrupted their conversation. Sarah quickly used her binoculars to scan the road, looking for any signs of hostile forces. What she saw instead were civilian vehicles and what appeared to be a Red Cross convoy. That's our way out, she announced, pointing toward the medical convoy. Red Cross vehicles have diplomatic immunity. If we can reach them, we can get Phoenix to proper medical care. Webb looked skeptical. And what makes you think they'll help American military personnel operating illegally in Afghanistan? Sarah's smile was enigmatic. Because they're not really Red Cross. That convoy is a cover for a joint CIA-MI6 operation that's been running medical supplies to resistance fighters in this region. I should know I helped design their operational protocols. The revelation that Sarah had been involved in designing intelligence operations sent another shock through the SEAL team. Every answer she gave only raised more questions about who she really was and what kind of authority she wielded. How many operations have you been involved in? Harrison asked as they began moving toward the highway. More than I can count, Sarah replied. Medical cover is perfect for intelligence work. Everyone trusts doctors and medical personnel can go places that soldiers can't. As they approached the convoy, Sarah activated her specialized radio again. White Angel, this is Guardian Angel. Request immediate medical assistance for priority casualty. The response was immediate and professional. Guardian Angel, White Angel. We show you approaching our position. What's your medical status? 1 priority casualty with significant blood loss, 3 walking wounded, and 1 prisoner requiring secure transport, Sarah reported. Within minutes, the convoy had stopped and medical personnel were examining Phoenix. But these weren't ordinary Red Cross workers. They moved with military precision, and carried equipment that was far more sophisticated than standard humanitarian supplies. The team leader, a woman in her 40s with a British accent, approached Sarah with obvious respect. "Guardian Angel, it's good to see you again. We heard you were in trouble." "Nothing I couldn't handle," Sarah replied. "But I need to get Phoenix to a surgical facility immediately, and Colonel Webb needs to be transferred to appropriate authorities." Webb was looking around at the convoy with growing concern. "Dr. Chen, I think you're underestimating the resources my employers have at their disposal. This isn't over." Sarah looked at him with the same calm expression she had worn throughout their entire ordeal. "Colonel, your employers made a fundamental mistake. They assumed I was working alone." As if to emphasize her point, several vehicles approached from different directions, all bearing the markings of various international organizations but clearly carrying military personnel. Within minutes, the area was secured by what appeared to be a joint international task force. A man in civilian clothes approached Sarah and Harrison, showing identification that marked him as CIA. "Guardian Angel, we've been tracking your situation. Colonel Webb's organization has been under investigation for months. Your intelligence about their operations has been invaluable." Harrison stared at Sarah in amazement. "You've been running an operation against these people all along?" "Not just me," Sarah replied. "Guardian Angel isn't just my call sign, it's the name of an entire program. We've been tracking illegal military research and weapons development for 3 years. Phoenix was loaded into a medical helicopter that had appeared as if from nowhere, with Sarah accompanying him to continue his treatment during transport." Before she left, she turned to Harrison and his team. "Gentlemen, officially this mission never happened. Your orders will reflect a routine training exercise that concluded successfully. But unofficially, you helped stop something that could have changed the nature of warfare in very dangerous ways." Rivera stepped forward, still favoring his wounded leg. "Doc, will we see you again?" Sarah's smile was both sad and determined. "Probably not. Guardian Angel operations require deep cover, and my face is compromised now. But if you ever need medical support in a place that doesn't officially exist, I'll be there." As the helicopter lifted off, carrying Sarah and Phoenix toward safety, Harrison found himself wondering how many other people like her were operating in the shadows, protecting the world from threats that most people would never know existed. The official report would list their mission as a successful training exercise. But Harrison knew that what they had really participated in was something far more significant, a small part of a much larger war being fought by people whose names would never appear in history books. 6 months later, Staff Sergeant Marcus Rivera sat in a military hospital in Germany, finally getting the surgery his leg wound had required. The official mission report had classified their Afghanistan operation as a training exercise with minimal enemy contact. But Rivera knew the truth was far more complex. Phoenix had survived, thanks to Sarah's medical intervention during those critical hours in the Afghan mountains. He had been transferred to a classified medical facility, where experimental treatments had saved his life and restored his mobility. But like everything else about their mission, his recovery was buried in classified files that would never see public scrutiny. Lieutenant Commander Harrison visited Rivera during his recovery, bringing news that was both encouraging and troubling. "Webb's organization has been completely dismantled," he reported quietly. "Turns out they were selling military research to hostile governments. Guardian Angel's intelligence helped shut down operations in 12 different countries." Rivera adjusted his position in the hospital bed, still feeling phantom pain from the shrapnel wound that had nearly cost him his leg. "Any word on Doc?" Harrison's expression was carefully neutral. Officially, Dr. Sarah Chen completed her assignment with SEAL Team 6 and returned to her medical residency at Johns Hopkins. Unofficially, Guardian Angel ceased to exist after the Afghanistan operation. But both men knew that neither statement was entirely true. People like Sarah didn't simply return to civilian life after operating in the shadows for years. She had become something beyond a normal military medic, and that transformation couldn't be easily reversed. 3 months after Rivera's surgery, Williams was conducting a training exercise with new SEAL recruits when he received an unusual medical consultation request. A young Navy corpsman had been assigned to their unit, someone with exceptional qualifications but a strangely incomplete service record. The new medic was male, Asian American, with the kind of quiet competence that reminded Williams of someone he had met before. During their first joint exercise, The corpsman demonstrated medical skills that went far beyond standard Navy training, and his tactical awareness suggested extensive combat experience. "Where did you serve before this assignment?" Williams asked during a break in training. The corpsman's answer was carefully rehearsed. "Various classified medical support operations, Petty Officer. Nothing I can discuss in detail." Williams studied the young man's face, looking for something familiar in his features. But whoever he had been before, this new identity was perfect and complete. Guardian Angel program had learned from Sarah's exposure and was now using even deeper cover identities. Meanwhile, in a teaching hospital in Baltimore, Dr. Sarah Chen was completing her emergency medicine residency with the kind of dedication and skill that impressed even her most demanding supervisors. Her fellow residents found her unflappable under pressure and remarkably skilled at treating trauma cases. What they didn't know was that their colleague spent her off-duty hours writing research papers on combat medicine that were immediately classified upon submission. Her official work focused on civilian trauma treatment, but her real research continued to explore the intersection of medicine and warfare. Late at night, when the hospital was quiet, Sarah would sometimes receive encrypted messages on a specialized phone that appeared to be a normal civilian device. The messages were brief and coded, but they indicated that Guardian Angel operations were continuing under new management and with improved security protocols. One evening, as she finished treating a car accident victim who reminded her of Phoenix, Sarah received a message that made her pause. Rivera had been cleared for active duty and was requesting assignment to a new Joint Special Operations Unit. The request had been approved, and his new commanding officer would be someone Sarah had worked with before. The message included a single line of additional information. "Package delivered successfully. Recovery complete. Guardian Angel protocols remain active." Sarah smiled as she deleted the message. Phoenix had not only survived but had returned to active duty in some classified capacity. Her medical intervention in that Afghan cave had saved more than just his life. It had preserved whatever intelligence asset he represented. Harrison received his own communication through official channels. He had been selected for promotion and reassignment to a new unit that would provide medical support for classified operations. His experience working with unconventional medical personnel had been noted and appreciated by unnamed superiors. The new assignment came with access to medical officers who had been trained in advanced combat medicine techniques. The training protocols bore no official connection to Guardian Angel, but Harrison recognized Sarah's influence in the curriculum design. 2 years after their mission in Afghanistan, the members of the original SEAL team found themselves scattered across different assignments, but each carrying knowledge that connected them to something larger than their individual roles. They had been witnesses to a shadow war fought by people whose identities changed like smoke, but whose commitment to protecting others remained constant. Rivera, now fully recovered and serving with an elite counterterrorism unit, occasionally encountered medical personnel who demonstrated skills that seemed familiar. Their training was always exemplary, their tactical knowledge extensive, and their ability to operate under pressure remarkable. Williams, training the next generation of SEALs, made sure that his students understood the importance of working effectively with medical personnel. His training scenarios always included medics who were more capable than they initially appeared, preparing his students for the reality that support personnel often carried their own specialized expertise. Phoenix returned to active duty with a new identity and assignment that took him to places that didn't officially exist. His recovery had been so complete that medical examinations showed no trace of his injuries, a testament to medical techniques that weren't available through normal military channels. As for Dr. Sarah Chen, she continued her civilian medical career while maintaining connections to a network that spanned multiple agencies and countries. Her research into combat stress mitigation had been refined and was being quietly implemented in military units worldwide, helping soldiers maintain their psychological stability while serving in impossible conditions. The Guardian Angel program had evolved, learning from Sarah's exposure and developing new methods for placing medical intelligence assets in positions where they could protect both military personnel and civilian populations. The program's existence remained classified, but its influence could be seen in improved medical protocols and enhanced soldier survivability rates across all branches of the military. In the end, the story of what happened in Afghanistan would never be officially told. But the people who lived it carried forward the knowledge that somewhere in the shadows, medical professionals were working to ensure that those who served their countries could do so with the best possible chance of surviving both the physical and psychological wounds of combat. And sometimes, in the quiet moments between crises, they would remember a young doctor who had saved their lives while keeping secrets that could change the world.